Okay, it's Saturday. You've tuned in to the two guys who still haven't got round to getting a jingle for the intro of this, which, considering how much I'm into music, I'm kicking myself. Brandon, are we going to get an intro jingle before we talk about what we're going to talk about today?
Well, that's kind of funny because we do have one. We've had one since the podcast started.
Oh my gosh.
Welcome to the Winged Hussar Pubcast. From fantasy to sci-fi to history and horror, your hosts are about to take you on a journey through all things Winged Hussar publishing. Sit back and relax as we talk about writing, gaming, as well as interview some of your favorite authors. Let's wing it.
It's like, on the one hand, I'm really happy that we've got the intro jingle. But on the other hand, it's like I own 23 guitars and I feel like even though I can't play them, I should have done something. I've got a ukulele. I could have done the ukulele.
You can do the break, like when we do the sponsor ad.
I could do that. And, you know, I brought this up deliberately because I've got an ulterior motive here, which is people on podcasts, they kind of talk some nonsense before they get into it. And I'm going to open up a bit of a can of nonsense here just for 5 minutes. And I'm going to do one of these things that, you know, like if you ever go to a house party, if someone asks you what you do for a living, it's probably because they think they do something really cool for a living. So normally it's like a pilot. So I'm going to do something similar here because I want you to reciprocate the question afterwards because I've been busy. So, Brandon, I hear you've been painting miniatures recently. What have you been painting?
Stuff and things, the usual. No, but in serious, I have been still chipping away at my Marvel United. For those that don't know, if I've never mentioned it on the show before, I've kickstarted all 3 seasons of Marvel United and hoping and praying that DC United goes through, even though I'm not a DC fan. For the record, I am up to 138, that sounded really bizarre, 138 painted Marvel United minis, and I'm currently sitting at 233 unpainted. For those of you who have kickstarted all the seasons and you're looking at numbers going, that seems a little bit weird. I do also have some fan-created minis that I found off of Etsy and the like, so I'm slowly building out that collection. And this is now post-Adepticon, so I have taken the plunge and I have started painting Infinity minis. I have 1 painted as of this recording and 1 other based. So I have now taken the plunge into Infinity. Mark, what are you painting?
I'm so proud you've taken the plunge into Infinity. And what a plunge it is. That is, it's quite a big jump, I think. Quite a big jump. But yeah, thanks for asking. No, I haven't been painting anything. No, just kidding.
Oh, good.
Right. What I've been painting. Bit of a long story. We had 2 cats here who we had for nearly 18 years who sadly they hit that point where they were really unhealthy in life, and I had to make that horrible decision, and which was really sort of awful for the family. But my daughter, one of her friends, bless her, the day after came round and she'd bought 2 little cuddly toy cats, black and white cats, to sort of as a memento, and I thought that was such a nice thing to do. What can I do to say thank you? And I thought, well, a man of limited skills, I'm going to paint something. So my daughter and her friends, they're at that age where they love Barbie dolls. They also all love Taylor Swift. I do not love Taylor Swift. We've been there before. So I looked up and saw what guitar does Taylor Swift play, and it's a whole load of them. But I picked out one, which is a Fender Jaguar, American, Brandon, as all the best guitars are. And it's a Fender Jaguar, America. It's a Johnny Marr signature guitar. He was the guitarist of the Smiths. You won't have heard of them because they're British. And so I got the resin printer out. My daughter immediately got jealous of the idea and said, but I want one too. So I have just resin printed out 2 Barbie scale Fender Jaguar electric guitars and painted them in the Johnny Marr signature Olympic white. And I've spent a couple of days on them doing all the ink washes, highlighting everything. And that has been my weird painting project. Barbie guitars based on reality. There you
So
go.
for all of our listeners, just keep that in mind. He's a man of multiple facets. He can write stories about denizens of the abyss and Basilean paladins riding off to save the day, and he can also resin, print, and paint Barbie guitars. Kudos
there
to
you have it. Well done, me. So here we are on episode something or other, which is we're just chatting about before this.
I'll tell you, it's episode 17. And
how have we done 17?
We've been doing this for a while now. So, yeah, that's not 17 months because there's some two-parters in there. But it's over a year. It's over a year and a half.
No. Jeez. Oh, my gosh. Okay. So here we are on episode 17. I knew that. And we were just talking about it before, that some of these episodes we do, they're not 100% scripted, but there is a game plan. There is very much a let's talk about this, we'll move into that, etc. This one, I much prefer. We've gone with a sort of more of a rough idea. We have a concept, we know what we're going to talk about, and then we're just going to talk nonsense for 8 hours. So what are we here to talk about? I'm going to stop talking for a bit and let you do a bit.
Well, we figured the last episode we did was Pana lore, and we will be getting back into that. We had a listener comment. Thank you for commenting on that, and we will be discussing that in next episode with our special guest. But this episode, we're going to kind of open the lens a little bit, and we're going to talk about something not just specifically to our Tales of Panathor series, but wargaming novels in general, and that is talking about heroes and named characters and, protagonists of these novels.
Yeah, because that's the thing of... I've been asked a couple of times when you go on these podcasts, and I think this is the delineation for me, is then it's like, okay, so you've done some lore stuff which is canon. Yeah, cool. Can we talk about it? No, not really, because it tends to be under non-disclosure agreements, and it's difficult to talk about this stuff. And also, when you're a third-party contractor, the authority you have to talk about this stuff is finite. But if you're talking about your own characters, then actually, no, you can say with 100% accuracy, this is what the character is, this is how I came about with it, etc. Because you've zoomed right in. And I've always found that the more interesting side of it anyway. It's kind of like if you watch old war movies from the 60s, stuff like The Longest Day, they tended to be about big events, and whilst they're visually spectacular, you don't really get to know any of the characters that much. Whereas if you then look at something like Saving Private Ryan, that small team of people, you really, really, really zone in, and I think that's a more engaging medium of entertainment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've discussed it in some of the earlier episodes, but I think characters and dialogue, everything that spans from the cast that you're reading about is always the most appealing thing to me. That's the thing that I always try to latch onto. And we have a mix of feedback from people of, I want to see more world building. I don't want to expand the world. You can't necessarily do that without a good cast of characters. And, the world building, I honestly feel like always should come second to the players involved in the story, because when you're reading these novels, especially if you're not interested in the game and you just read as a sci-fi and fantasy enjoyer, you want to read a good story, and you can build out the world and spread in details into that mix, but your characters need to be what they latch onto. And this goes back to what we talked about with our character episode and how to write strong protagonists and everything. But one of the most interesting things about the settings that we specifically work in is there's already an existing world. There's already existing characters. There's already, in some cases, graphic novels that exist. There's lore in the rule books and scenario books and expansions that exist. And basically, it's our job to come in and say, all right, we're going to take this specific portion and we're going to build out a story around it to help tell people more about the world. And again, the most important thing of that is who are you going to use? Who's going to be your vessel to tell that story? Throughout the different IPs that we've worked with, we've had access to heroes and we've not had access to heroes. There are some that we go into that we cannot use any existing characters because those are specific to the IP holder and they don't want them touched until they say. And then there are some IPs that we work with that they say, please, we have all this pantheon of different characters. Please use them and give them actual stories. So, Mark, you've been our first author on 3 big IPs that we've worked with. How does that feel when you go into a faction? Like, how do you decide whether you want to, if you have the availability, how do you decide whether you want to use an original character or an existing character? And how do you figure out where the backstory and the expansion and all that goes into it when you're crafting your novel idea?
I think when you do the opening novel, it's a pretty gutsy move to go with an established character, because what you're doing, let's pick one that's easy to chat through. Steps to Deliverance. So writing that, there's several years of lore which already exist, but with a game like Kings of War, I'm not in the heads of the designers and the marketing and all that good stuff, but it always, as an outsider looking in, that appeared to me to be a game which had the tournament scene very much at the forefront. It was about balance, and more balance, which is a good thing. That's not a criticism. That's a good thing to have. But the lore was kind of nibbling around the edges. That was there as, let's try and make this world feel a little bit lived in. So in the first few years, there wasn't that much stuff. So when it came to writing that, I was like, well, I don't really want to take any of these characters. The job's already difficult enough, because what we've got to do is take some relatively shallow concepts in areas. That sounds like it's a dig, but it's not. They really are. They really were some relatively... there wasn't a huge amount of depth to them, and try and start shoving some depth into it. And if you're then going to take a established character who's been a model and who's had rules and people have used for tournaments for years, but hasn't had a backstory, you're doubling the difficulty of the job. So that's why on a couple of occasions when I have used characters that already exist and that an IP already own, it's 1 or 2 novels into it. It's once I've kind of found my feet a little bit, because I think it's a lot more difficult to do.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point about we are entering a territory where people have played as characters and they use them, they like them, and how you write the novel is either going to have a fan out of it or it's going to have somebody very upset about the betrayal of that character. One of our earliest foray into it was Wild West Exodus, and the direction that we were given with the novels, quote unquote, is to piss off the fans. And it didn't sit well with any of us. We were being told to kill characters left and right, and then they would magically come back in future works without any explanation as to why. They just were there. So that was tough because we weren't given a lot of scope about where the series was going as a whole. That game was focused primarily just on named characters. So everybody we had to work with was a named character. So we had to be very careful about how we were portraying those characters. And, we've worked with different game companies that say, it's fine, you can kill off XYZ character. But at the same token, when you kill off a character in the novel, where is the desire to then use that character as a gamer? I mean, if you disassociate from the lore, sure, yeah, you can just say, well, that doesn't exist and I can continue my own headcanon. But I sort of look at it as, I go back to the Lord of the Rings miniature game, which was, my life for a long time, because when I went to games days with my dad, I would run Lord of the Rings tables. I ran The Last Alliance one year with my buddy, and that was a lot of fun. But you look at certain games where it's like, all right, now we're in Return of the King, but do you use Boromir? Do you not use Boromir? Boromir's dead. Should we put him in scenarios anyway and just for fun and just use him? It's, as a gamer, I was less inclined to use him because I wanted things to be quote unquote canon. But for fun, I would enjoy throwing him in and saying, like, well, what if he was still alive? So it is a tough mix to try to see where people are going to fall. It's tough to see, if I kill this character here, will this have a bigger effect on the story? So, it's just like we're the I'll say quote unquote guardians of the lore, just like we're playing in somebody's sandbox and we have to be careful with the tools that are at our disposal. Characters are a big part of that too. We've slowly started using more named characters in the Panathor series, and we've had some cameo characters in the Chronicles of the Human Sphere Infinity novels. And your most recent one, by Fire and Sword, that focused on a named character as a main point of view character. And it was an interesting take because I don't think we've necessarily done that since the days of Wild West Exodus. I mean, when I look across all the Panathor novels, really only the dwarf novels by Ben Stoddard are the first ones to use named characters that are already existing as a primary point of view, because that was the direction we were given by Mantic. The other ones, I'm trying to remember, but I don't think any other ones that we've done since have had it. And as a reader, as somebody who was just getting into as I mentioned at the top of the show, getting into Infinity and everything, I was really excited to now get a DeFearson model to add to my collection, because I'm like, oh, we wrote about him, this backstory, this lore, like, you fleshed out his whole character, and I know that you worked closely with Gutierrez to get it to that point. But it's a cool thing to have a mini that you read a story about, and you can actually physically put that mini in front of you, paint them, and then play with them. I think that's a really cool concept.
Yeah, that's all right. So yeah, it was really interesting, because it's like that has been a strategy in entertainment, and I don't think it's ever really gone well. The one that people keep going back to is Star Wars since the Disney acquisition, and you look at the characters like Luke Skywalker and think, what were they thinking? And that certainly goes around my mind in terms of, okay, they've entrusted me with a character, so okay, Infinity, that's a good example. Gabrielle DeFearson as a character has had multiple models, multiple iterations of rules over the last few years, and in source books has got pages of not huge amounts, but a decent amount to say this is what this character is. I go as far as to say, back in for what for me was the heyday of 40k, second, third edition, to me was when it was at its best. The Infinity characters have got about the same amount of backstory as the 40k big characters did back then. So it's a reasonable amount. So when I was going to write that, I thought, I've got to get this right. And you've got to be respectful. You've got to make the character badass, You can't just say, okay, of course you want the vices, you want the flaws, but you want them to be impressive, because this is someone else's creation and you want to respect that. So that's what I tried to do with DeFearson is, he's a grumpy, cantankerous, middle-aged, starting to nudge towards old age man. But he's still, lethal, potent as a soldier. And underneath all of the anger and the outbursts and the rants is a good guy. And that's what I wanted to try and write him as. And it was kind of funny to me that so far, and it's early days, it's very early days, so far I haven't had anything back from the Infinity community saying you screwed that character up. No one has said that. They have told me I screwed up one of my own two of my own really, in Downfall, which is kind of funny because they're my characters, so I know I created them, although really sort of one of the ones which has drawn criticism my wife created quite a lot of. And it's like when they said, oh, well, that character wouldn't act that way. Wouldn't they? How do you know? So, it's really weird. It's cool that you get the interest from the community, but it's definitely... that is at the forefront of my mind. You look at some of the really huge international IPs and how much people are absolutely besotted with characters. And you look at when Luke Skywalker appeared was it the end of season 2 of Mandalorian? And there's video footage of, people celebrating like it's the winning touchdown at a Super Bowl in crowded bars and then hugging each other and crying because Luke Skywalker has appeared and it's been done right. And that's the power that the lead character in a franchise can have, and that's why you need to do it properly, as The Mandalorian did with Luke Skywalker, and as The Last Jedi, cataclysmically failed to do. So yeah, that's the sort of stuff that's going through my mind when I've got someone else's character and I'm trying to do it right.
Minor rant, but yes, I'm wholeheartedly on that boat. I was even though I've kind of fallen out of love with Star Wars a little bit, I was a huge Luke Skywalker fan growing up. I had a Luke Skywalker Return of the Jedi action figure that I played with all the time, and the sequel, the whatever episode it was, 8. My wife looked at me and said, "Can we return this movie because it was just so god awful?"
Yeah.
I was so upset with their treatment of Luke that when I saw the scene, I didn't actually watch season 2 of The Mandalorian because, again, I fell out of Star Wars love a little bit and I just haven't gotten back into it. But when I saw the scene with Luke, I loved every moment of it. I was like, this is what I wanted out of the sequel series. I wanted this epic, awesome Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, and that's it. And I'm pretty sure I know who wrote that episode, but I'm not 100% sure, so I won't start name dropping people from from that in case I get it wrong. But that's the difference between someone who said, I think I understand what George Lucas's vision was for this character, and I'm going to go 100% redlining to try and respect that, and which is why that was so popular, and The Last Jedi was not. So yeah, I think that those exact principles that they come across in what we do, in what we're all trying to do with our community in the Wing to Tsar side of things.
Absolutely.
I wrote Hero Falling, and I had 2 characters in that were nothing more than 2 paragraphs. They were reskins of Dungeon Saga characters in an expansion pack. And I've said this in a few podcasts, I wondered at the time, was this a labour of love to someone? Were these 2 named characters something that someone really had ideas and goals and aspirations for them to become something awesome? Or was it like, this is a reskin, I just need to get 2 paragraphs on there quickly and then move on because I got deadlines to hit? I don't know who wrote them, and I'll never know what the aspiration was, but I treated it as if it was the first. And so even though they're so minor, I wrote them trying to make them cool and give them life, and give them good points and bad points, and just make them interesting, I hope.
Absolutely. I mean, they stood out as individual characters, and I can remember them very clearly from their personalities. And I'd like to hope that they make an appearance in the future because never say never. But going back to your point with Star Wars, that's more or less what we try to do with any of the franchises we work with. Is we have to get approval from the IP holder before we proceed with any novel, before we bring anything to print. As I'm going through and market. You actually don't see this part of my work as much because I don't necessarily need to worry about this with you as much as I do other authors I work with. But as I'm going through a manuscript, I'm anything that is an overreaching statement or anything that I feel like is a very poignant detail that states something for the faction or the race as a whole, I will mark up and I'll say like a Mantic note or CB note or whatever, and then I'll compile a document at the end of all of my notes and send it to the IP holder so that way they can have the final approval. 95% of the time, it's all, this is fine, this is okay world building, we're fleshing out the factions and the races, it's fine. But I do get the occasional 5 to 10% of, no, this is wrong. No, this needs to be changed. No, this isn't how we envision it. No, don't talk about this at all. So that's part of what we do, is make sure that, we are the guardians of the lore and make sure that we do showcase it in a way that the IP holders want it. And on the topic of named characters, it's very poignant, and we want to make sure that, ultimately the relationship between us and the wargaming company is we want to appeal to the broader science fiction and fantasy audience. It's always the goal. We want to draw people in, and we want to tell good stories. But we also want people to come into the franchises and go, oh, wow, I really like what's going on here. I like the visualization. I like the storytelling. I like aspects of this that I want to know more about. And then you can say, well, if you want to know more, there's a whole war game associated with it that you can play and, learn all about the world in which it exists. In Mantic, we're on the third version, and to how many supplements and so many races and factions and all sorts of stuff. With CB, we're on N5 just came out, and there's graphic novels, there's a TV show coming out, there's all this expansion of the world to live in, that we're one facet of that. And we want to be able to say, hey, you don't necessarily ever need to play the game, but you can enjoy science fiction and fantasy, pick up this novel, and if you want to learn more, there's a world more. So the named characters, that's always what we want to try to do, is we want to say, okay, this character exists and people have used this character. I want to tell a story that's going to make people want to keep playing as this character. If you've never played as this character, you want to actually pick up the model of him and for yourself, like I did with DeFearson and Kyle. And, we want to make sure it brings new people in, respects what's already there. With original characters, it's a little bit more different because there isn't that hook. There isn't that model, there aren't those rules, there isn't that hook to get people in. But it also gives us the freedom to do more and create more and put our own character in a niche where there isn't one. So let's go back to Steps to Deliverance. We have Orion, who, Vince and I call the Captain America of our team, because he was the first character to set the tone for the Panathor novels. And when you say Tales of Panathor, most people will be able to recognize Orion. And that allows them to then customize whatever mini they want to take his place. I mean, in a perfect world, he's a paladin, correct, Mark? Yeah. That's like what you would want to use typically to represent Orion. And the cool thing is, being wargaming industry and being able to customize stuff, you can make a custom mini. And we've actually seen at least one diorama, and it's fantastic. But the goal is to get people interested to that those characters are their gateway. That they say, oh, well, there's no character for this, so I want to make one. And I want to, have him be the center point of my army, and, I'll base an army based off of that character. I mean, that was always, when I was reading Gaunt's Ghost, I think I was reading the novels before the minis came out, and I would always look to see, I'm like, what character can I use to represent this character? What model can I use to represent that character? And just try to build out my Gaunt's Ghost armies based off of existing minis. Even when I was writing, Rebirth of Courage, and I was trying to make minis based off of all my characters, I remember going to the first Adepticon I went to the bits market, and I was like, oh, let me see, I can get this one, and I can customize this and put a different weapon on this one, and if I paint it this way. I mean, nowadays with Hero Forge, it's very simple to just go online and create a specific hero to whatever army and game you're playing. But the goal is to try to get people interested in a character, to want to represent them on the tabletop, because that's the hand in hand with this, is you want to be able to read the novels, play the tabletop game, read the novels.
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing. Is that there's a definite difference for me between Infinity and Kings of War, because Infinity ultimately is about named characters in a lot of ways. Maybe that's it. No, that is a gross oversimplification, but more so, because you can turn up with 8, 12, however many models, and it's about having your backbone of cheerleaders, your cheap chaff who will generate orders so that your cool characters, who are very often named, can have multiple orders and go forward and do stuff. Whereas with Kings of War, it's an objective-based game, again, however, with your different units having unit strengths, named characters more often than not have a very low unit strength, so you will win a game of Kings of War by using big, bulky units of 20 red shirts who will go forward and seize an objective. So the named character, the hero, that side of it, I think lends itself more to Infinity in terms of on the tabletop. So it's an easier link to make for me in that regard. Kings of War's a bit tougher because Kings of War's a rank and flank game, and it is about the units. So, but yeah, in terms of putting them together, it's the same sort of philosophy. I remember kind of as in my early teens when GW was the only option, and you bought these cool models, and they were named characters. And in the codex there'd be a page of backstory of them, and it really generates interest in them. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with the ones that existed, is have, if someone picks up the model of Differson, is to have that same feeling. And now with Kings of War, with the one I've just been written another 1,000 words of this afternoon, it is about Gnaeus Celestis, who has had a model for 10 years in Kings of War, something like that, but there hasn't been a great deal written about. So I'm trying to do the same thing, but whereas Differson I wrote as an angry, dark character who underneath all of the bluster and rage is a thoroughly good guy, I'm writing Gnaeus Celestis. It's almost the exact opposite. As an absolutely lovely, altruistic, great guy who everyone adores, who underneath it all there is something dark. Not in an evil way, not in a cliched, oh, he's abyssal. No, just a danger. There's a simmering danger underneath it that if you annoy this guy, this lovely guy, you wouldn't want to annoy him. So I'm trying to write him in a completely different way, but with the same thing of make the character cool. This model has existed for ages. So respect the original intent and make them cool.
Today's episode is sponsored by On Military Matters, your source for new, used, and out-of-print books on military history, wargaming, and modeling. Check them out at onmilitarymatters.com and make sure to sign up for the weekly e-flyer. That's onmilitarymatters, all one word, .com.
So I've dragged it back to the named characters, but for you, Brandon, having edited a few of these named characters, or I suppose even wider afield, because we've sort of talked about the Infinity stuff a bit, in terms of the cast of characters for Kings of War, which stand out to you as the most interesting in terms of the potential transition, or if it's already happened, of tabletop, here's a model, here's some rules, but actually this is a really cool idea for a story in a novel?
Oh. We're talking just Kings of War right now?
Yeah, to start with.
It's a great question. Well, we're going to do a Morgoth novel at some point. It was talked about, it was planned, we have an author planned for it, but it's not on the forefront of focus right now. So I think Morgoth would be a really cool novel because he is a very complicated character, and I think there's a great story to tell there, but we'll tell it eventually. I honestly think the Celestians were such a cool concept that Mantic just hinted at for so long and didn't actually give us concrete information for. And I think the way that Clint's done it has been a great way to transition lore in the game into a novel. It's not for everybody because it is dense. There's a lot of information to try to take in. But for those that enjoy it, really enjoy it, I think that's probably the best thing from Mantic I can think of. I'm trying to rack my brains. I'd like to see more dragon, personally. There are dragon models, and we don't have any dragons. That's not true. Clint had an undead dragon in Rise of the Celestians. But other than that, there's no other novels that use dragons at all. We're a fantasy setting, and nobody's written about dragons.
I do like that they're not common, because if you're to look at some of the D&D settings, Dragonlance, for example, which again I'll be tentative. I'm treading on thin ice here because I don't know these settings particularly well. It's only from computer games, really. Excuse me, but Dragonlance is like everyone rides a dragon. It's almost like what have they just done, the live action remake? Live action remake of with my son loves the cartoon How to Train Your Dragon, where everyone gets a dragon. right? So a dragon's like a pet dog or a horse or something like that. Everyone gets a dragon. They're everywhere. I don't like that idea that much. I like the idea that these things are really, really, really rare, special. Not quite full The Hobbit, there's only one left, kind of thing, but somewhere in between, where they are kind of all named and, I was going to say Skyrim does it well, but even more rare than that. And I think that so the way it's gone so far with the Panathor stuff, I like the fact that there's references to them, but you don't see them everywhere. Same way with magic, that you can have franchises where magic, anyone and everyone can use it, but we haven't done that with Kings of War. It's sort of something you've pretty much got to be born into to have the potential for, and then have the training to do something with that potential. He says tentatively, I'm pretty sure I'll have Wiki Dave send me a message as soon as he's read this and say, that's not technically true. And to be fair to Wiki Dave, a hero of the community, he corrected me on the last episode we did. And he said, yeah, you made a mistake on that. And I was like, go on, Dave. Go on. What mistake did I make? Because I'm pretty sure, dude, I'm the author here and you're not. And then he said, yeah, you did this. And I was like, ooh. Yeah, he's entirely correct. He's 100% correct. So the moral of the story there is listen to Wiki Dave. He knows what he's talking about. But yeah, so keeping these concepts rare in the characters, I've really diverted from what we came here to talk about. But I think that's a really cool thing that the entire team has done with a Kings of War setting. I much prefer it that way.
Well, you know what's interesting is balance in the heroes. Not every protagonist is going to be a Lord Champion, and not every protagonist is going to be able to slay an army. And I think what's really interesting is I haven't had to really focus so much on balancing the characters. I think everybody's kind of, in both franchises, have established the mission of your character is not a deity. They have flaws, they can fail, and they can't raffle stomp an entire army in one go. We've not had... There's been one issue in our Panathor novels that you pointed out that passed a lot of other eyes, and we corrected that issue, which led into a whole fun novel. Yep, yeah. That led into one of our most interesting novel concepts. But that was the only instance of a character rising above their wargaming station to take on a much stronger character. And that's the other reason why I really like the fact that almost all of our Kings of War authors have played the game, because they can write that without you necessarily knowing that they're doing that, because they're having, more or less, I think the authors all assign their characters a specific role, and I can see that. I can see how it translates, and they're able to go on par with other characters of their specific role, but they don't necessarily take the fight above their station. And if they do, it is within reason. And again, as your standard reader who doesn't play Kings of War, you're not going to see that. You're just going to be able to tell there's a difference in station, but you're not going to necessarily know the ins and outs. And I think the Kings of War players can see that and identify that, i.e., as you did.
Yeah, it's...
Infinity. You go.
Is that a bit different?
Yes, but you go.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, on the Kings of War side of it, there's sort of two aspects to come out of that. I think that's the first one is, I know we've been through some submissions from potential authors which have been rejected, where it's just like, okay, it's the equivalent of saying, I want to write in the Star Wars franchise. Cool, what's your plan? Okay, I've got a character which is definitely not an extension of me and everything I stand for and everything I want to be, who's going to turn up and is going to be the greatest Jedi ever, and Luke Skywalker is just going to go, oh, I can be nothing like you. You're just amazing. I'm pretty much describing Ray Palpatine already, but and it's like, so, and I didn't mean to. That wasn't where I was getting at. what I was getting at is some of the submissions which have come to you is like someone has just basically said, "I've created the next Captain America," and you're like, "But we don't want that. We don't want someone to just come in and say all of the stuff that Mantic have spent years putting their heart and soul into. I've just made as an unpublished first-time author, I've just made someone who's better than all of them at everything. It's kind of mistake 101. You don't do that." And some people still do, but none of it's getting through the filter, which is good. But in terms of that kind of, what about on the tabletop itself, translate the characters across? I think what most authors do, which I haven't, for better, for worse, possibly for worse, is the eclectic mix, the merry band of different people of here's 4 hobbits who all do different stuff, and then here's the elf who's the agile one, here's the dwarf who's the tanky one, here's 2 human fighters who have different skills, here's the magic user. All that stuff I didn't really want to do because I was trying to write a war story. So it's like, okay, Steps to Deliverance, what's it about? Tancred is ostensibly the main character. His stat line is Paladin. He's backed up by his second in command, Orion, who's a Paladin. Similar stat line. We get to the next novel. Orion is now crewed up someone else, Katarine. She's a Paladin. Similar stat line. It's because they're soldiers. And I'm trying to write a military novel where people have got commonality of training, of equipment, of strategies, tactics, etc. So the differences come in them as a human being and who they are as a person, not in terms of their tabletop prowess. And so I think that's where I've maybe gone somewhere in a different direction, because I think a lot of the other authors, when they have an ensemble cast, will have loads of a shotgun blast of different character types, which has definitely got its strength as well. You've got that real variety in people. But as these characters then start to grow arms and legs, and you get people from the community get in touch with you who show an interest in one or more of them, you've then got to start to break them out. You've then got to start to say, if there were stats for these characters, this is the special rules I'd give this one and that one to make them different, because they are starting to become their own thing. Very convoluted answer. But
it makes sense.
By all means, follow up on that, or you're going to go on to Infinity, whichever you prefer.
I mean, that all makes sense. I mean, Infinity really, there's not much more to say about Infinity. You know, we are only 4 novels in finished so far, and I mean, it again goes to everybody kind of, you can see where the gameplay mechanics come in if you understand the games, and if you don't, you can appreciate it as a science fiction novel. I mean, I started really getting into the rules. I mean, what my job as editor is not necessarily to see how it marries up one for one. My job is to make sure we're telling a good story. I do see where a majority of the points are marrying up in the gameplay aspects of it, but it's tough to try to keep all of the gameplay aspects in my head while I'm still learning all the lore aspects of a very deep franchise, and I don't have the community to play these games. That's the other aspect of it. I'm just starting to get into Infinity, and I'm just going to start establishing a community of players. But as I'm reading through the rules, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see where they use that. I can see where they use that. I see where they use that. And I can see where the aspects marry up. But again, not fully grasping those rules before reading the novels, it was perfectly fine, and I understood it to a T. So those characters are the same thing of, you know, each one of the 4 novels has named characters that we've established are, you know, as I'm going through, I can establish, okay, this represents this unit, and they're not rising necessarily above their station. You know, I mean, everything that we do can be replicated on the tabletop, and it's taking those named characters, again, going back to the theme of this whole show, is taking those named characters and driving interest. You know, my goal is you read Downfall, and you want to get a Pan-O army. A little biased, but yes, I did just order a bunch of knights from Infinity because I love the way they look and I love the way Mark wrote them. You know, you want to write you want to read Team Z and be like, oh, I love these nomads and the hacking and everything. I think that's really cool. I want to be able to recreate that. Did CB send us some nomads that I asked them that we could display at the booth? Yes. Have I just started painting them? Maybe. So, I as a reader, I want to recreate these characters, and if I'm going to get into the game, I want to be able to have different characters that I can recreate, and that's the whole tie-in, is can we generate that interest? And from the community feedback, I think we've done a good job, but, we want to hear from you guys. If you're listening to this, you've made it this far into the podcast, tell us what you think. Tell us if you like how we're taking named hero characters and utilizing them, and original characters and utilizing them. Do you want to see more of one versus the other? Do you have characters from Winged Hussar Publishing novels painted up? Send us pictures. We would absolutely display them on social media.
Yeah, my gut feeling, I think, and this is just a hunch, I think people in general within the wargaming community want to see more of the already named characters rather than original ones. And I think that is because if you're already playing this sort of game, why would you play a war game instead of a board game, instead of video games, whatever? People obviously will spread themselves across all of these things. But one of the things which draws people to wargaming is the hobby aspect, is the collecting, the assembling, the painting, all of that stuff. So if you have an interest in lore and the named characters, you may already have the models. And making the jump from, I've already got this model, to now I want to read a story about them, rather than I'm going to read a story about something which is just an ethereal concept. It's just up in the air. There's nothing physical to collect and paint. I don't think has got as much of a draw to it. Which then begs the question, so why would authors bother? Why would you do that? And the reason is that if you're the sort of person who's going to spend months of your spare time writing stories, it's because you want to tell stories about the characters you've come up with, or your close friends have come up with, or your gaming group has, rather than a company on the other side of the country or on the other side of the world, where it's like, okay, that's an interesting challenge, it's an interesting concept, it's fun to do, but I think most authors would rather do their own thing. And rather come up with their own concepts and have creative control over where it's going, rather than have one hand tied behind your back where it's like, I've got to be really careful here that I do this the way this was intended. That's just my gut feeling. So I think most readers would rather see more of the already named characters, and I think most authors would rather come up with their own. And there's a natural disconnect there, which we've kind of got to bridge sensibly when we put all this stuff together.
Well, that makes sense. And yes, I hope this is kind of like pulled back the curtain a little bit, as we try to do on this show, try to pull back the curtain and give people a little bit more insight about how we pick and choose and how it all comes into play about named characters versus original characters. But I will leave the listeners with one thought. Again, another peel behind the curtain. Mark and I have been talking lately, and I've been brainstorming an idea for Infinity, and I potentially have a pitch for an Aristea novel. I apologize if I've butchered that. But if people want to see that pitch, or if you want to hear more about it, let me know. Maybe I'll workshop and brainstorm the idea on the show a little bit and get people's feedback. I also have a pitch for Kings of War that's long since slumbered because I have been so deep in contracting these novels, I haven't looked at it in forever. But it's a very, like, I guess you could say Lord of the Rings-esque, magical item-esque adventure. And I started it a little bit in the Edge of the Abyss anthology, and it's a continuation of that character's story. But I haven't done anything with it because, too busy. That's why I haven't really, and probably won't do anything with the Infinity pitch I have. But, if people want to see and hear a little bit more about, my brainstorming session, and you want to see me actually write a novel instead of just editing them, leave that feedback, and then I'll take it into consideration. Mark, any final thoughts or suggestions or questions or bacon?
I think the only thing would be, I personally would love to see more of your writing. However, there is a caveat, which is if you write it, you're going to need to have a separate pair of eyes to look at it, to edit it. And having dipped my toe into the world of editing, as much as I would love to support you, that would not be the first thing I would volunteer for, because editing is hell on earth, and editors deserve more credit than they get, because it's a horrible, thankless job. And that's the negative I'm going to end on in there. Please show love to editors. Say nice things on Amazon. Say this was edited really nicely. Yeah, that's it. That's all from me.
We love our audio editor, Chris. You do a fantastic job. Show him some love, please.
Yeah. Say nice things in comments. Say, those two guys, they really don't know when to shut up, but it was edited masterfully.
Oh, boy. Anyway, thank you, everybody, for listening. Tune in next time for another adventure. Well, actually, tune in next time for an episode of Panelore with Wiki Dave. And then we've got an interview with Robert Waters coming down the pipeline and some other stuff. So keep on listening. Thank you for the love and support.
Thanks very much.